Hello everybody and welcome to this month's episode of Princess Auto's See It Work, the show where you get to see our product live in action. My name is Matt, this is Derek here, and on today's episode we're going to be talking about electric fencing. If you're new to this show and you have any questions to ask us about electric fencing, please ask us in the comment section and you will be entered to win a prize. Today we are actually giving out 2 prizes and both of them are starter packages for your own electric fence package. We would like to thank our vendor Parmak for supplying us with this great line of product and the giveaways for today's packages. So Derek, what can we talk about here on electric fencing?
Sure. Well, we've got kind of a range of items here. We don't have every single thing that we carry in the store at Princess Auto, but we've got a good cross section here. We're going to be talking about insulators, poles, the wiring, and the energizer packs.
Excellent. Yeah. That sounds great. Well, how about we start with some of these posts here?
Sure.
When we're looking at posts for an electric fence, what do you want to be looking for?
Well, I mean, you can use existing posts if you have them. They can be any material. They can be steel, wood, nylon, plastic, fiberglass. The big thing is going to be the insulating quality of the post, right? So if you have existing posts, let's say, and they're wood posts, you're going to be cautious of any moisture that would be getting into the wood, right? Because the system is grounded through the ground. So the electrical current will run through the ground and make a full cycle. So we'd want to make sure that we have proper insulation at the wooden post. In the B-roll here, you can see we're using the 4-foot, 48-inch Bigfoot poly post, and that is completely insulated. So there's no question about the insulative quality there. You know, you've got fiberglass options, steel options, and then again insulating each one specifically. Approximately, you know, in a situation like we're seeing here, Matt, you're setting this up for like a temporary pasture, right, to do a repair on a fence, perhaps.
Yep.
You'd want to space your posts on uneven ground, maybe about every 10 feet or so. On flat land, you could go up to, say, 30 feet.
Oh.
Right, and of course, dependent on the animal you're trying to contain or the animal you're trying to keep out, right, because you can use them for predators as well.
Absolutely.
You want to set it up ranging, you know, an approximate on, if you're using one strand, maybe what they'd consider nose height, 2/3 of the height of the animal.
Okay.
But if you have a range of animals, or you're, again, different predators you're trying to keep out, you could set up multi-strand. The posts we have here, the yellow ones in the footage, is they have 9 insulator slots on them, so you have a range from almost right at ground level all the way up to the top, about 4 feet high.
Oh, that actually sounds great.
Yeah.
We have a few questions coming in here that would be great to hear.
Sure.
We got one here from Stephanie. Can these be used on trees as posts?
Yeah, they could be lashed to a tree, and then wire, zip tie, whatnot, and wire run through the channels on them. They have a nice 10-inch spike on the bottom to keep them secure, so if you can get it right down close to the tree itself and then tether it to that, yeah, you could certainly use them.
Awesome, that's great. We got another one here from Darcy. Can your fence be turned off and on?
Absolutely, yeah. You can turn the fence off and on. You can do that by, depending on the type of energizer you have. If it's the AC unit, you can unplug it. If it's a solar unit, you can simply disconnect one of the lines. And there are switches that you can buy for the fence system itself to be set up on the fence, so it's a little bit more local to the area. If you're going to be working in a certain spot on the fence line, you could have it switched on or off there, so it doesn't, no chance of getting shocked.
Excellent, excellent. And speaking of getting shocked, because I'm pretty sure we're all wondering that here,
yep.
Stephen Lawton is asking, how painful are they to touch? Say someone were to put it along their fence to keep people from hopping their fence and robbing them. Right. How would this work to deter them?
They wouldn't probably do it more than once. Let's put it that way.
That's the shocking truth, isn't it?
It is, and the more grounding you have for the fence system, the better the charge is going to be transferred through. And of course, the power pack you're going to be using. The larger the power pack, the more charge you're going to get out of it. So yeah, it's a deterrent, absolutely.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So that's for keeping out people. What about for working around a garden? We had this question asked by Ivy. Would this work well for a garden for, say, keeping small animals out, like rabbits?
Absolutely, and there's a couple things you can do. If you had some chicken wire, perhaps metal, right? That's conductive. You could hook up, clamp the leads to that, so the fence at that point would be energized. You could use the posts and run, different types of wire or the cable that we have here, the rope, and at different levels, right? If you have rabbits you want to keep out, and there are different values of energizer packs. So at that point, you're not going to give them the shock of their life and possibly the last shock they'll ever have.
Of course.
But it would be a good deterrent to keep them out and keep them from getting into the vegetables and whatnot.
Excellent, that's great. So yeah, we were talking a little bit about the poles here with our electric fencing. If you are just joining us today, we are talking about electric fencing. We just talked a little bit about our posts, and what about these insulator clamps as well? Say you have a wooden post up and you don't want to be putting up more of these posts. What would you do with some of these insulator clamps? Well,
yeah, there's a range of insulating adapters that we have here. So right down on this board here, we've got a sample. So we've got specifically for wood, because again, you're going to be wanting to isolate the wood from the wire. These guys are a fence post mount, and they're screwed on with a wood screw, deck screw, something like that. And I'll turn it to the side here. You can see the wire would drop down in there, and it's kind of fingers that are kind of staged like this. So the wire would wrap through them, drop down, and then won't pull out if it gets jostled around. And then a little bit down lower, we've got a similar item, insulated with a 1/4-inch lag screw. So you drill a small hole, set them in, and could be used in a kind of a temporary fashion, could be used in a permanent setup, and space them accordingly. If you have something down low, something down high, one in the middle, or as many as you need for the different sizes of animals you have. And then we've got quite a few other ones, honestly. I mean, we've got, these guys will go on a T-post. So similar to what you'd have for winter fencing.
Right,
You can utilize that, right? And clips on, same thing, the wire would wrap through here and get held in place. And then on the fiberglass pole that we have here, we actually have one that can be changed from round pole or round rod. I'll just spin it off here. Up to 11/16 in diameter is what the insulator here will accept. This is on a fiberglass pole. This is one of the options we have here. So you can add circuits to that. It's something like this. You can see how in this slot right here is where the pole would go in and just kind of tightens down over top of it. And then you can adjust. If you have some freestanding metal poles, you can add it to that. It's going to isolate away from the metal. Excellent. Or if you happen to have, using these pigtails and you want to add a lower line on the bottom, you could put it down, a few inches from the ground, maybe one in the middle, whatever you need to do. There's a lot of adaptation, which is really nice.
I guess it'll help you too in case one of these little edges break off as well too.
I mean, if something happens, it's a tool gets dropped on it or something like that, or one of the animals gets a little rambunctious and chews on it perhaps, who knows, right? Yeah,
exactly. So I think we'll take a few more questions now and talk a little bit more about this. Can you control these units with your cell phone?
These ones, no. They're going to be just basically plug and play, powered by, again, AC current or battery powered, charged with solar. So once they're set up, they're on for good.
For sure. Yep. All right. We got another question here from Dave. What do you use for a ground rod or a ground plate?
That's a good question. Ideally, with any system, a minimum of 3 8-foot ground rods, spaced about 10 feet apart. Now, of course, depending on where you're at, we have Canada, we've got everything from sand to clay to limestone to Canadian shield and bedrock. So there's a few different options you have for setting up kind of a grounding system. We do have the insulated wire down here, which is a good option for setting up the grounds and also running between fence gates. We'll get to that in a minute. But something like this would tether your ground rod to another ground rod, and you can have it running underground so it's not a tripping hazard. But they should be pounded into the full depth of about 8 feet and then clamped on in place. And we do have all the clamps available at Princess Auto. And then the better the ground, the better the shock, right? That kind of makes sense. The better the system is set up. So in some cases you might need to add, and then in some cases you might adapt. If there's winter, let's say, the ground's frozen, you can't really get a ground rod driven in. You can actually energize and stagger 4 lines. Say your top line and your second from the bottom could be tethered for power, and then the second from the top and the bottom line could be tethered for ground. So in fact that circuit is complete, and then you'd be able to use it until the ground thawed out and you could actually drive ground rods in.
Excellent. That makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
We have another question here actually from Darcy. Is there any restriction to the size of property? Say, for instance, they're on an acre here. Is there any restriction to the size of fencing you can do?
No, like for instance, the solar pack will charge up to about 30 miles, maybe a little bit more. And then the 120 AC pack is going to do about 50 miles or more. So, and of course, there's smaller versions as well. They're going to give a smaller charge and for smaller areas, right? So if you're only doing a small patch or something, you don't necessarily need to go for something you might have a cattle ranch set up, right? So
absolutely, yeah. So another good question brought up here from Jerry. Can you hook it up to a wire cow fence? Like if you have a metal fence hooked up already,
yep,
can
absolutely.
you just hook up this to it?
Yep, you sure can.
Oh, wow.
And the nice thing is both of these units and all the units that we sell through Parmak are low impedance. So they give a very brief but sharp shock. So they're I believe 0.003 of a second. And it's just an instantaneous shock. The high impedance units that used to be carried years and years ago, they were on a charge consistently. So if there was vegetation in the area, overgrown at the posts and whatnot, that could actually transfer through the vegetation and in some cases cause fires. That's happened in the past. And of course it's live all the time. This is going to be just a charge, a charge, a charge. It's a repeating cycle. So yeah, I mean, it's a much better, safer setup than in the past.
Makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. Well, we've taken a few questions. I think we should talk a little bit more about the wire, but for anybody who is just joining us or anybody who is currently watching us right now, please put your questions in the comment section and you can be entered to win a prize. We have 2 prizes today. Both of them are an electric fence starting package, so you never know what you could win.
That's right.
But as we take more questions here, let's talk a little bit about the wire. I see different styles of wire here. What do we have here, Derek?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a myriad of wire. Like what you're setting up here on the B-roll, we've got the roll down here. That roll will cover approximately 1/4 of a mile, just that one roll. And something like this would be ideal for a temporary setup. So like, let's say the scenario we gave here is, there's some damage to a fence line and you've got to get the cattle moved over just to get them into an area, a paddock to kind of graze and keep them safe while you're doing the repair. So you can literally tether that. And again, we'll mention the wood. If the wood is damp, you wouldn't want to use the wood. You'd want to isolate the wood with rubber or plastic or something like that. And we have a bunch of different insulators to do that. And then you would run your strand, set up your posts, and away you go. So this unit, or this wire I should say that you have here, it's a fiberglass coat, PVC, and stranded with wire in between. Light gauge, very obvious. The yellow and black is easy to see. Livestock can see it, people can see it, so that's a really nice feature. Then we have, solid aluminum wire, which is more conductive than steel. You could use steel barbed wire if you have a barbed wire fence or chicken wire, or one of the questions we had previously. You could hook it up to that indeed. And the other options we have are the insulated wire and wire rope. So basically wire rope, something like this would be probably more for cattle and horses, right? Okay. Heavier strength, up to about 1,000-pound break point. And lots of conductors running through it. I believe there's 6 conductors through that. Ooh. And then back to the insulated wire, I just wanted to touch on, we mentioned earlier, is for the grounding system, it would be perfect. But if we take a look at the front of the label here, I'll put it up top. As you can see, it's meant, one of the other uses is going to be for a fence line. So when you've got a gate and you don't want to have the gate charged necessarily, but you want to transfer that current and then continue on down path, is you can bury the cable underground. It's going to protect the cable and obviously not, actually make contact with the ground. And you'll be able to utilize the fence gate as you did previously, and you won't get shocked every time you grab the gate and aren't thinking that the fence is charged.
For sure.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a big thing. I guess you want to make sure you don't get shocked. And had another great question come in here from Stephen Lawton. He's asking, does it make a sound as if it's running, like a tick or a clicking noise?
Yeah, you'll hear that charge. Obviously closer to the machine, or the energizer I should say, but the fence itself won't make a sound.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And another question here from Nicole Samantha. We've heard a lot about keeping animals in. What about keeping them out? Would it keep out a bear? Absolutely. I was actually speaking to a gentleman on the phone this week, and he was using it for bear and for elk. It was out in BC. Locally, though, I do know that there was a fellow who doesn't live far from us, and he had his hives raided by bears. So something to consider if you do have a beehive system or chicken coop, pig pen. There's all kinds of predators that are going to be going after those kind of animals, and this would be a perfect situation. And it can be moved, which is really nice. Any of the push-in posts, right? If you don't have a pen outside of the pen that the animals are in, you could charge an area around
around it, so you'd still be able to work around it, but not necessarily have to come in contact with the fence.
Absolutely.
So keep them out of just a yard per se. Yeah,
For sure.
You could run an exterior.
And to make sure that nobody would say get permanently injured, how easy is it to cut through this wire here? Like say if you took wire cutters to it. We have a question here from Anna Carr. Curious if a child were to say take cutters to it, would they get a shock and could they cut through it quite easily?
If they're making contact, like for instance, we have a pair of lineman's pliers, right? They're cutting end and a plier end. So if you're making contact with the metal component here and not the insulated portion of the pliers, then you would get a shock. When that shock is pulsed, if you happen to grab it or touch it in between the pulses, there's a good chance that you wouldn't, but there's always a chance that, if anybody's going to be working around the fence and young person, someone new to the property, just say it's an electric fence, put up some signage. It's a nice thing to use as a deterrent. Animals can't read, so humans can, and we want to make them as safe as possible.
Absolutely. Yeah, and speaking of that safety, do we have to check with any local bylaws if electric fencing is allowed? Another question from Anna.
It wouldn't be a bad idea. I don't know off the top of my head, but every local municipality is different. They might have different bylaws and regulations, so not a bad idea to check.
That sounds great. All right, we're still taking more questions, so please, if you have questions, add them to our comment section. You will be entered to win a prize, which is an electric fence starting package here. We've talked about the posts here, the wire, and the insulator clamps, but I think we want to get to the big ticket items here,
Sure.
The energizer. So
that's the fun stuff.
Why don't we talk about this solar panel one right here?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the one that we used here in the footage, and the nice thing is it's very portable. It's could be used for temporary or permanent applications. It can be laid in place here, as we'll see, Matt, when you're just kind of doing the fence repair. Lay it down, try and get the best path of sunlight that you can. If there's any kind of trees around or whatnot, try to get your best angle. And it's a simple hookup, right? So again, you could permanently mount it. We do have a mount specifically for this solar charger, the solar energizer, I should say. And yeah, hook up to your power lead, and then your ground's going to your ground. And once everything is connected, you're good to go. You're off to the races. So there is an on-off button on the Energizer itself. So, obviously when you're working, I could see it's in the off position. Once it's live, as long as you're insulated, you'd have no issue. So if you have the proper rubber boots and rubber gloves and those kind of things, you'd be safe to work on it, but always a good idea, obviously, to turn it off. Yep.
Well, it looked like the gentleman in that B-roll knew exactly what he was doing when setting up that fence.
He's a pro.
Yeah, I would think so.
I think so.
But would we need a certified electrician to hook up an electric fence?
No, not at all. It's something that any property owner can do, very straightforward, just with some common sense and safety protocol. Obviously, the 120 AC Energizer that gets plugged into household current, that you wouldn't plug in until everything was said and done, and you're ready to test the fence. And at that point, yeah, I mean, we can touch base on the AC unit. The solar unit is 100% weatherproof, so it can be left out in the weather. There's no question there. The AC unit should be stored either, if it's makeshift, under a bucket or a cover, or you can make a little kind of a house for it. Or if you had, just inside of a door of a barn or a shed or something like that, and then you could run your power wire outside and then, conduct it to the fence and away you go.
Okay, and how about the wire? How does the wire hold up in weather like, say, rain or snow?
Yeah, I mean, it's there's moisture wicking on the rope. Snow, really, they're meant to be out in all elements, so there's no real question for that. Ideally, if it's something temporary, just with the sun being what the sun does for coatings and rope and whatnot, I would always store those kind of items inside if I wasn't using them. And let's say, for instance, the unit that you have we're showing in the B-roll, the solar charger. If we're going to be using that only for short periods of time, I would suggest trickle charging the battery like any other battery. It is powered by a 12-volt battery. You'd want to have that kept charged and kept live. If you leave it sit, batteries typically don't like to sit with any state of discharge, and it would just make the battery last longer.
That's great. That actually leads me to another question here we have from Rodney. What is the life expectancy on this solar charger here? So
typically the charger itself, quite a while. The battery inside, now depending on the weather, depending on the cycle of use, you're looking at probably 3 to 5 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah, and the chargers are all like low impedance, so they're the circuitry in them, they are more than worthy of standing up for years of use. They do have, I'll also note something interesting, is they do have circuitry in them that will protect them from lightning strikes. So, you know, with obviously, if there's any metal on a farm or out in the open and lightning's going to strike, it's a possibility. So it's built in.
Fair enough. We got another great question here from Melissa Denise. Can you adjust how strong the shock is when you touch it?
Not really. I mean, I guess yes and no. So they're set up to be, you know, their maximum voltage, and of course, depending on the amount of strands you have in your fence, and also the grounding, the more grounding, the better. So if you really want to make sure you have the most optimum shock level coming out of the Energizer, is install quite a few ground rods. In some cases, you know, 3 is the minimum, 5 maybe even more, and they could be placed, you know, like I say, about 10 feet apart wherever you can find a spot to sink them in, and just hammer them right down on the ground. Now, to the ground rod end, they are galvanized, so they do have a nice protective coating on them, but over time, you'll see some corrosion and things possibly kind of get into the mix. So every couple of years, you might want to check the quality and maybe replace them.
Sounds great. Well, that's a lot of information on this solar panel unit. Yeah. How about we talk about this 120 volt unit here too, because it looks quite a bit different to me. So what's the big difference between these two units?
Yeah, so I mean, you've got your solar units powered by a battery and it's self-contained. So once it's hung and hooked up, it's on its own. Obviously, if you don't have any power where you are, the AC unit isn't going to work well for you. It needs to be plugged into a consistent power source. And it is a more powerful unit than the battery operated one, which stands to reason, just the amount of voltage going in versus voltage going out. Yep. With the 12 volt battery and the solar unit. And again, not really weatherproof. Good idea to keep it inside. It's a 50-mile range versus a 30-mile range on the solar unit. Yeah, so it's, and again, we have smaller units too if you need to do something on a smaller scale. But you know, for equine or cattle or something like that, certainly get the larger one.
Awesome. That is great. That is great. For those of you who are just tuning in, we are talking about electric fencing supplied to us by our vendor Parmak. If you do have any questions, please add them to our comment section. You can be entered to win a prize. We're giving away 2 prizes today, and they're each going to be an electric fencing starting package. One will include the solar panel unit, and the other will actually include this 120 volt unit. So we're going to take a few more questions here, answer a few more questions, and just talk about this. So we have another question here from Anna asking, how deep do you suggest these posts go?
Well, the posts will only sink up to a certain point. You've got about a 10-inch spike on the fiberglass and the poly one, and you're probably 8 to 10 inch on the pigtail and the steel one. So get them sunk right down. Like for instance, we'll take a look at the Bigfoot ones that we've got in the B-roll. That's got the 10-inch spike. It's got an actual, you know, spike nail head on the top that is built into the post itself. So when you go to pull it out, it's not going to pull out and leave the spike sticking in the ground. It's going to come with it, which is really nice. So you can utilize them in, you know, different areas, take them, store them, put them up when you need them. A really nice option.
Excellent. That sounds great. I have a great question here from Jax Bailey asking, can you tell if a portion or section stops working? Is there a way to test it? Does Princess Auto sell a product to help you with that?
We do, yeah. We actually have a fence tester here. That's this guy. So this will register between 2 and 10,000 volts. So depending on the type of fence setup you have, you'd obviously want to be to the high end. If you have an idea of what your Energizer is going to be putting out, let's say it puts out 6,000 volts. So if you're in the 6,000 volt range, you're great. If it's any lower than that, especially if it's in the 1 to 2,000 volt range, there's going to be some kind of resistance in the fence, which would mean that you know, something's fallen on the fence. There's some damage to some of the wiring or the materials that the fence is the current's flowing through. Or you could have vegetation growing up, vines, that kind of thing, if it's a long spectrum run of fence. It's a good idea to check every once in a while, keep the fence line as clean as possible, just to keep that away to allow the fence to do its job and work as easy as possible.
That's great. A question here from Brian Power. How much daylight does it require to daily maintain the battery in this solar powered unit? What about in northern areas where there is not a lot of sunlight, say in winter months? Yeah,
well, winter months, we're getting into that season here, right? We're going to be seeing, you know, dark early and dark late. I would suggest if you could have optimum, you know, 4 hours or more of sunlight, that would keep the charge consistent. If it's in a very northern climate where you've got, you know, just a few hours of sunlight, well, you're not going to see it perform at its peak performance, and that's something to consider. If it's something you could run an AC unit at that point, if you do have something local to be able to power it with a hard wire, I would suggest that's the best option.
Great. Yeah. Jackie here asks, do you carry the mesh fencing for smaller animals?
We don't, but that can be, I say, utilized if you had to have a small chicken pen or a coop or something, and you have that type of 1 inch or 1/4 inch fencing, anything like that. You could certainly charge the fence with that.
And it's really good because you can set things at adjustable heights as well too, depending on the size.
That's right.
That's great to hear. We got another one here from Northern Chris. Can you run the AC powered Energizer from a generator to keep bears out of a camp while on the property?
Absolutely, yeah. I've heard of people doing that if they're out camping or if they have a property where bears are a problem and they like to do kind of off-the-grid camping. Certainly an option. Yeah, you could do that. It's very easy. It's a very the power supply does not require a lot of voltage, so even a small inverter generator, 2,000 watts, something like that would be just fine.
Perfect. Yep. I got a great question here too from Sandy. Ice, we get some awesome icicles. Would two icicles touching the wire short it out?
I guess if it was in the right condition and it was wet, it's the same. All of the wire is energized positive. The ground is going to be where you're getting your contact. So if it was making contact with the ground and in the right situation, there's a possibility that could happen.
For sure, that makes sense. So we see some of these cows running through this pasture here now that we have this temporary fence up. We've got a great question here from Rod. Will the shock cause a skin burn? No,
it's a very quick shock. So there would have to be some kind of dare or something to hold on to that line too long. Yeah, no, it's a very quick instantaneous shock. Like I say, it's not a constant electrical shock that's going through the fence and no charge. Yep. So no, it would be very quick.
That makes sense. And what about the pulse going through the electrical wire? Can it cause any type of interference for any other type of electronic devices nearby?
That's a good question. We do have Parmak in the chat, so if they can see that answer or see the question, they can answer that certainly. Not that I'm aware of, but I think everything's, the circuitry in both of the equipment, pieces of equipment are designed to kind of counteract that.
All right. And of course, we have another question here too, asking about the replacement parts. Do we have more replacement parts available than what's shown here?
Yeah, we do have, like for the, we've got fuses and the replacement terminals right on the bottom of the Energizer packs in case something gets damaged or lost or something like that, dropped on transport. We do have replacement components.
Excellent. Yeah, I hear Parmak's very supportive for us in that end.
Very, very good.
And how about we have another fun question here? Could it be used to zap like mosquitoes or black flies?
I guess in the right situation it could.
If they land on it?
They'd have to touch the ground and the wire. So,
so it's got to be a big fly.
A big fly, big mosquitoes.
Okay, yeah, that makes
That's northern Manitoba.
Yes, yeah. We don't have to deal with that here.
Yeah.
So yeah, and when it comes to animals touching these, will it really hurt or injure the animals?
It won't injure them, but it will make them think twice about going near the fence line again.
For sure, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yep. All right, we got a few more questions here before we wrap things up. Is the solarless of a shock or the solarless unit compared to the wired unit? What's the shock like compared to the two?
You're going to get a larger shock, and there is a larger Energizer that we carry on the AC side. You're going to get a larger shock out of the AC unit than you will the battery. Just, again, the charge that's in the battery isn't as strong as you have a constant AC supply.
For sure.
It's converting it to DC, but it's still a bigger charge, right? So, yeah, the red guy is going to be more powerful than the brown guy.
Yeah, and this one would be definitely better for a more portable unit where you don't have electricity nearby.
Don't get me wrong, you'll still know that you've touched the wire with the solar unit, but the red one is stronger, and it's for bigger pieces of equipment, I should say, bigger animals, right?
Absolutely.
Horses, cattle, that kind of thing, like the Angus that we saw there when you were out in the field. You'll still be able to give them a good jolt with the solar unit, but the AC one for a permanent fence would be ideal.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So that'll really help. Well, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today on this month's episode of See It Work. We'd like again to thank Parmak for supplying us with these great products and these prizes to be able to give away today. On that note, our winner of these prizes for today, we have Cam and Agatha Crogie from YouTube and Jax Bailey. Congratulations, Cam, Agatha, and Jax for winning these prizes today. We hope you really enjoyed them. We would also like to thank Willow Rock Angus in Enola, Manitoba for allowing us to film all that wonderful footage there. And of course, thank Parmak again for coming to help us out.
Excellent.
Fortunately, I got to get running. I just remembered I didn't put those cows back in their pen. So I'm going to have to get going. But again, thank you all for joining us today on this month's episode of See It Work. And we'll see you around next time.